Hello, my friends. Let's go ahead and do a tutorial on using code pipelines in the cloud. So specifically, we're going to be working with AWS's Code Pipeline set of tools. So let's go ahead and go through this written document that I will share with you. We're going to be using Code Pipeline, Code Deploy, GitHub, and IAM roles. So imagine that you had an HTML page that is sitting on an EC2 instance somewhere. The idea is we want to automate deployments and updates of the HTML on an EC2 instance, and we will use Code Pipeline to help facilitate that. So Code Pipeline, think of like someone who conducts an orchestra. It kind of helps all the pieces work together and do their parts. So what this involves is GitHub having your HTML page in it, uh, Code Pipeline as the service in AWS watching for any changes that happen in GitHub. When it notices a change, it's going to interact with another AWS service called Code Deploy, which has authorization, once we set it up the right way, to deploy the code that was over there into an EC2 instance. Now, it can be one instance or multiple instances. And one of the key things here is we put a tag on an EC2 instance. So usually when we create it, we give it a name at the top when we're using the console, but you can add additional tags, and those tags can be used by tools like Code Deploy to say, hey, let's put all of the HTML changes that I have just noticed and put them onto as many EC2 instances as have a particular key associated with them or a name associated with them. Sorry, not key, but tag. I meant to say tag. That have a particular tag associated with them. So you might have hundreds of EC2 instances in your account, but you only want to put your HTML on certain ones, and the ones that we know we want to put stuff on has a tag. All right, so just some thoughts about this. If you make any typos throughout this, it is so easy to get something wrong on this. So be very, very careful. Um, Off we go. All right, first thing we need to do is explore code pipeline. So maybe I'll shrink this page up a little bit so I can see both pages at the same time. Even though I just did all of this yesterday for like 4 hours, I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to go off of my notes. So first off, I'm going to look for code pipeline in the console. And I'm going to take note of which region I'm in because anything I do is region specific. So you can't have like code pipeline in one region and EC2 in another and having it be conducting those. You really need all the stuff in the same place. So start in North Virginia or Ohio, like whatever it is you want to do. Now notice that when we open this thing up, it says developer tools in here. So Code Pipeline is both like an orchestrator of things as well as a within the AWS account, a set of tools that work within Code Pipeline. I know that sounds weird. It's more than one thing at once. Anyway, we'll touch all the parts and hopefully it becomes clearer. All right. So let's go ahead and see what we want to do next. If you had any code pipelines running, they would be listed here. And what this means is that you have some software application, and that application uh, gets code from a code repository. And when the changes take place, they are usually pushed out using code deploy. And code pipeline can kind of tell us how everything's going in that process, when the last deployment was, and stuff like that. So it sees all of the parts at kind of a high level. So if we click on Create Pipeline to see what this looks like, let's see. The default option is to use a template to create a code pipeline, and I'm not going to get into that at this point. Um, if I click continuous integration, notice that we can use templates associated with, predefined stuff related to building certain environments. We're not going to be doing that today. We're going to build everything from scratch. So we're going to click Build a Custom Pipeline. So I go Next. And notice the items over here on the left-hand side. Here are all the steps that we're going to need to go through. We're going to give our pipeline a name. Then we're going to select a source state, which is where's the code coming from. We're going to optionally compile our code, optionally push it to a test area, and then mandatory deploy it to our deployment or a production stage if we don't have that, and then we can review things. So those are all the things that we need to do as part of a seven-step wizard is make decisions related to that. But we don't actually have all the tools we need for this. We don't have any code in a code repository, as is in step three, and we don't have EC2 instances set up where we're going to put things. So as the administrator conductor of all these things, pipeline needs these things to exist for this to all work. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on things. So the first thing we're going to need is a code repository. So let's go out to GitHub. Hopefully you already have an account there somewhere. I have already logged into mine and I'm going to click New and I'm going to select me as the owner. I'm connected to multiple things, and I'm going to call this Donut Website Repo, and it says it's available, and I'll say code repo or Donut Corporate Website. Yippee. I think I can take all of the rest of the defaults that are there and I will click Create Repository. All right, we're going to need an HTML page for our repo here because this is going to feed our code pipeline. And if I follow this link that is right here, I can find some code and I'm just going to, oops, copy and paste. Oh, boy, these touchpads are a little tricky. Trying to scroll here. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. I've got all the HTML. I could post it into a document and then upload it, like so I could put it into VS Code, but just to save time and effort, I'm going to I'm going to use a different method and just edit directly within GitHub. So you can use what I created, or you can modify the HTML code to any other HTML page you want. There's your recommendation. So on our repo page, I am going to look for this little link right here that says create a new file. And I'm going to call it index.html. It will sit in this repo. I will paste in this HTML. I haven't done this before. What's this do? Preview. Okay. I was wondering if it would give me an HTML preview. Nope. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and select commit changes and just accept what it tells me. And now I have a repo with one file in it, and we know what that file is. Okay, now we need, if you're going to do something more expansive than what I just did with a bunch of HTML pages and with graphics, you would need to put them all into this folder, however you want to do that. Okay, next thing we're going to need to do is set up some roles. There's going to be at least three different roles in a policy that we create as part of this whole code pipeline thing. At a high level, the way that the cloud works is that whenever one service is talking to another service, let me just come back to here. I'll say leave. Whenever one service, whether it be code deploy or code pipeline or a an EC2 instance, whenever these things are talking to each other, we typically have a role involved, and I'll talk about that later, that gives specific permissions about what can be done related to one service talking to another service in your account. Basically, we just want to lock it down really carefully. So we need to create lots of roles in order to make all this stuff work. So back over here, I'm going to type in uh, IAM, Identity and Access Management. And just as a high level, One of the things that we're preparing for right now is to give permissions to we're going to have an agent, and an agent is a piece of software that runs on your computer. And as it relates to the code deploy agent, and when I say computer, I mean EC2 instance. By usually when you make changes to your EC2 instance, you use a person like yourself, you SSH in there and you do stuff. But you can install a program that we'll call an agent, which acts as you, and it can do the stuff that you would do. But we're going to limit that agent to what permissions it has when it's doing that. All right, so at a high level, that's probably a sufficient explanation. Another thing I should mention is that we use roles when we want permissions that are temporary. As a person logging into an account, you have the same permissions all the time when you're in the account. But oftentimes when we have one service talking to another service, or our agent doing things, we want to give it temporary permissions. So they get like basically a set of permissions that expire after, maybe a couple of minutes after they've been issued something that allows them to do stuff in your account. So they're not permanent credentials. And so why does that matter? Like, well, one thing you could do with making changes in your account is you can literally create a username and password for an administrator and embed that in software code. But then if anybody ever saw your username and password, they could do that stuff too. So this is kind of more secure to have roles that don't have usernames and passwords associated with them that can be temporarily assigned to something, and there's just less chance of something bad happening. Okay, so let us come down here, and I'm here under roles, and I'm going to, so roles on the left-hand side, I'm going to click create role, and I'm going to interact with an AWS service, and it's EC2. So I need to create basically a temporary permission thing that I can assign to things that interacts with EC2. So I'm going to click next, and I'm going to do uh, Amazon EC2 role for AWS Code Deploy, and it's actually the first one in this list. So I'm selecting this. There's a policy that defines what permissions it has. It has something to do with EC2 and code deploy. All right, and I will call this my EC2 instance role. Right. And I think that's all we're going to need. And so I will just click create. Oh, and it already exists because I did that previously. All right. Oh, and the reason why I didn't delete that is because we need it for our second lab, if you're going to do the lab after this one. So anyway, there's just a summary of my role, and I can see the permissions that are assigned with it, stuff related to S3, apparently. All right, fair enough. Okay, cool. We're done with that. Let's go on to the next thing. Create an instance with AWS Code Deploy installed. So the idea here is that we need an EC2 instance with software installed that you can use that software, the agent, instead of logging in as using SSH. So this will facilitate deploying things. Okay, so let's go ahead and click Launch Instance. And at the top, we will call this corporate website. That actually doesn't matter. But the next part does matter. Add additional tags. We click that, we add a tag, and we could create, whether we created one instance or 100 instances, this name that we're using right here, PDC home page server, identifies this as something that code deploy is going to talk to. So we don't actually technically need to put in the value part there, but that's okay. All right. And I have a little depiction here saying your EC2 instances are like a bunch of characters in a Where's Waldo picture that there's lots of them, and code deploy doesn't know where to push code unless you give it some identifier. So before I called it both a tag and a key, and this is why. Anyway, it's just a tag with a name associated with it, and it helps identify where code's going to get pushed. Okay, so down here we're going to do Amazon Linux 2023. T3.micro is already selected. We're going to select proceed without a key pair because we won't need it because there will be an agent installed. Okay, now my default VPC, it says default right there, has an additional name on there. I apologize for that. Yours shouldn't have something like that on there. But you want to pick your default VPC that you haven't broken in some way, like taken away its subnets and its internet gateway. So if you still have a functioning default VPC in your particular region, you should use that. Um, I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to scroll down to the security group portion and I'm going to create a security group for permissions on this EC2 instance. The EC2 instance itself is supposed to be host a web page, so it just needs port 80 traffic or 443. We're going to simplify and just do 80 traffic today. So PDC home page is the name of the security group, so the firewall that we're creating for this EC2 instance. And instead of SSH, I will remove that because we won't be accessing it that way. We're going to need an HTTP connection to be able to come in from anywhere. So that looks like this. All right, down under the advanced details at the bottom, we're going to add an instance profile to it, which is the EC2 instance role. Let's see if they've got some summary of this. Uh, anyway, this basically says that this EC2 instance can do stuff in your account based on the permissions that are defined in that role that we just created. All right, let's go ahead and come down to this box down here. So we have one time only here to basically provide the type of things that you would type in using SSH. So this is a little bash script, and when the EC2 instance starts, it's going to do an update on the EC2 instance, install Ruby, install the AWS command line interface, change into the default folder, and this is the key part. It's going out to code deploy um, and grabbing a piece of software that it will then install. So basically, we're installing the code deploy agent, which will then be listening from then on, and you can basically set your pipeline can then push code to that agent, and then the agent then has authorization to do stuff on the computer. All right, so there, or when I say computer, I mean server. I have a summary here of all of the settings that we just did, and I will click, let's see. All right, where's All right, I need to hit, usually if the screen's wide enough, you can see the little pop-out box on the side. Here, let's watch, make it happen. There it is. There's your summary. Um, anyway, but since it's all crammed, it doesn't show it. So I'll click launch, and hopefully all the good things are going to be happening now. Okay, so it looks like it was launched successfully, and there it is. It's running. Okay, now separately, I'm going to go and create what we call an application in Code Deploy. Now, Code Deploy is a service. It's not a code pipeline itself. It's a service that its sole purpose is to receive rules or have rules that you define in it for how it will interact with servers that you're deploying to. It's highly configurable, so we have a lot of settings associated with it. So I'm going to, okay, so now because Code Deploy is a service interacting with your EC2 instance, it needs to have a role created. So I'm going to go back to IAM again. And go to roles, and we're going to click create role, AWS service. This time it's related to what code deploy can do. So I'm clicking that. I will click next, and it's already got the policy that it's going to need there. And if I go next, you're supposed to give it a name, and the name is code deploy role. And I already did this, so it's giving me an error. But for you, just click code create, and you will get a green message, and you're good to go. Okay, so now that that thing exists, we can go over to code deploy. Okay, and within code deploy, we create something called applications, which at a high level, it allows you to give something a name like, hey, this is my I don't know, my corporate website that I'm going to be pushing out. And underneath that application with the name of corporate website, you can do things like push to development, push to testing, push to production. So application in a way is just a name and an organizing principle for something you recognize as your application. There's a book called The Phoenix Project. So your application could be the Phoenix Project, and you're just pushing it out to different places. Mainly application here in this context is just the name of something, and then some of the other services in here under code deploy will relate to that overall project or code base or name. So we come down here to applications, and I've got something that I believe is part of my lab 2 associated with this. So I'll be deleting that later. We are going to click on create application, and we're going to call this PDDC home page application. So again, remember all the code base in GitHub shows is just an HTML page. And the application gets pushed to what type of output. So this also implies that code deploy can push to Lambda, it can push to containers, it can also push to virtual machines, EC2, or ones that you're defining with the right permissions. So you could have something in your data center that you push it to as well, using code deploy. All right, so there's my application. So that's a high level about what it does, and the application is kind of done, but now we just need to add some configuration. So next item is uh, the next thing is we're going to create a deployment group. So deployment group could be things. One way to define this is um, referencing, a way to push to production servers, test servers, etc. And we identify which servers those are, if I recall correctly, in the deployment group. So the group means the group of servers. Which servers are you deploying to? So we click on create deployment group, and we'll give it a name, and we'll call this production homepage group. And the service role is one that we just created. It should be there in the drop down. Deployment type in place. So there's different ways that code deploy can push things out. It can like create anyway. Well, I won't get into the details. Well, it can go to like different farms of servers, and or it can just replace the code on an existing server. We're saying just exist the code on it, change the code on an existing server. Um, all right, let's see if we got anything else in my pictures here. Oh, configuration. We're pushing to EC2 instances, and then which ones are we pushing to? The ones that have this key associated with it. All right, so we're creating a connection from code deploy um, to particular servers in our account. And then we have some deployment settings, how we want to do this. Well, I don't know if it really matters which of these we pick. So that doesn't matter. So just take the default. And then make sure you uncheck load balancing. That'll complicate our life. We don't need that right now. So with that, you've got all the screenshots of what you need over here. And I will go ahead and click Create Deployment Group. And it is ready to go. All right. So I have some comments here. Let me just scan them really quick. It's configured to push code to instances that you've tagged with the right tags. But what we haven't done is we haven't told code pipeline or better yet, or code deploy or better yet, code pipeline where the code's at and some things related to it. Um, so anyway, let's go ahead and do some more work. Out of 56 pages, we're halfway through. Um, I think we'll just carry on and push through here. Okay, so code deploy is does some crazy things. When you're updating an HTML page, you don't really need to do anything complicated, but it can do much more complicated things. So code deploy usually gets fed several different files or configuration files that tell it how to operate for your particular application. So you see right here kind of this word. So here's four files that we're going to be working with. And we see appspec.yaml, install dependencies, start server, stop server. And I have links to each of those here. So what we do is we put these files that the code deploy agent is actually going to read and use these on your server. And in addition to the HTML pages that get deployed, we every time we do a deployment, we can also deploy these instruction sets that code deploy can use to know what to do. And the instructions might say something like, they're basically bash scripts, these ones down here. The instructions say things like, hey, copy from a temporary upload folder over to the HTML folder where Apache's installed or something like that. So let's go ahead and look at all of these files. And okay, this is kind of annoying. Okay, file, new tab. So there's one. Oh, and we need to download it. So you do this four times, and after you do this four times, you download the file. Whoops, what have I just done? That was weird. Okay. So you're gonna have four files to download. Let me just go ahead and pause because that takes a second. So recording, pause. All right. Coming over here, I downloaded the files one, two, three, four, and now I'm ready to work with them. I'll pull them onto a separate window. The next instruction says go back to your GitHub repository and we're going to need to add them. Now, as it relates to our root directory here, um, we need to have the bash scripts that we're going to upload to our server in their own folder. So the way that we can do that is click create new file, and then right here we type in scripts and then do forward slash. Ta-da! And it looks like it's got a nested folder now. All right, and to get this started, so there's a place to upload things, I'll just call this temp.txt and just put a file there. Okay, so now it looks like we have a scripts folder, and I need to add in everything but the appspec.yaml. So from here, I'll say add file, upload files, and it says, do you want to drag and drop them? And I say, sure, let's just do that. So these three bash scripts are going to be copied there. And so let me pull it away, and I click commit changes. And once those are uploaded, they're in this scripts folder. If I want to double check, there they are. Perfect. Click back. I need to add the appspec.yaml file in there. So let me go ahead and click add, upload a file, commit changes. All right, so I don't think on day one you're supposed to be an expert at all of this, but I do want to give you some familiarity on how this works. So if I click on this file, which relates to the code deploy agent, some of the things it says is, hey, in this particular code repository here, there's a file called index.html, and it's going to get put in a zip file. And when it gets expanded, where we want it to go on the target server is var www HTML. So, and that happens to be the Apache directory in this case. So we're saying, now we only have like one file here. If we had lots of files, we would have to do lots of entries. So, but this just says, again, to code deploy, hey, when you see this file later on, put it right there. And then there's these other things called hooks. And hooks are basically you can define there's basically a life cycle for doing deployments. And so you could say, hey, before we push out whatever this code is, maybe we should stop something. And the way that you would do that is run a bash script potentially that says, like service HTTPD stop. So you can put the commands like that in your scripts folder and reference them here. And so there's a whole bunch of these things called hooks, which are things like before you install, after you install, before you deploy, after you deploy. Uh, so depending on the nature of your application, you could consider like lots of different things that you would normally do when you push out code. And you could basically have a different bash script for every one of those life cycle events. All right, so if you were going to, in addition put to this HTML page, if you made a more complicated example of what I just did, then you could do things like, for example, add an image and put it in here by referencing it. So maybe the image is here, you reference the source that way, and then you say where you're going to push it there. So um, here's the syntax for copying over an entire folder if you wanted to do it that way. So you could just do like a backslash instead of referencing a single file. So basically, you can say everything that's in here, push it into a particular directory, like in this case, var www.html, and that would be fine. Okay, so we're going to finally create our pipeline now that we've created a whole bunch of tooling. So let's go over to here, and we will say under pipeline, pipelines. There's none here. We will click create pipeline, build a custom pipeline. We will go next and call this thing the PDC home page pipeline. If you need to take a pause, go ahead and pause, rest, and then come back. This is all taking a while. You can't have these things be too long. I make a little note about that, otherwise it crashes. So be it. All right, let's go ahead and click next. Now it says provide the source. Because I've done this before, there's already a little bit of authentication going between my AWS account and my GitHub account. So you'll have a little bit of more steps to fill in than me. But where's the code going to come from? It's going to come from GitHub. And what's the connection we're going to use? You want to click on the white button right here, connect to GitHub, and you will create a connection name. I call mine Paradise Donut Repo Connection. Then I go connect to GitHub. And so basically this stuff's a little bit of hand waving. Sometimes I like to explain things in detail. At a high level, you understand we got to create a connection between these two things. So just follow along. Um, some of these things aren't necessarily intuitive. It's just the way that AWS does it. So you might get a little pop-up that asks you to authorize a connection from your AWS account. And you may or may not have seen that just then. We are going to install a new app is our next step. We are going to be interacting with repositories, and I'm going to select only a certain repository, and that's the one that we just created, which for some reason I always scroll past it. Concert app, donut website repo. There we are. So this is what we're going to do. Install and authorize, select repos. We selected just that one. You could delete the others if you got more than you wanted. Install and authorize. and it's asking me for a little bit of extra permissioning. So I'm saying yes. And now I'm going back over to AWS. It's created some app number related to this connection that it's created. So be it. And now we can scroll down and click connect. And so after all of that work, we have this like little connection string that is the authorized connection to GitHub. So now that it's seeing GitHub and it's seeing a single repository there, I can go into the drop down and it says, hey, is this the one you want to interact with? And I say yes. And which branch do you want to interact with? The main branch, because we didn't create anything else. All right, we're going to accept the defaults and go to next. And now we're on the build stage. We're not compiling things like this is Java or C sharp. So carrying on. Oops, wait a second. Oh. Skip build stage is what I wanted to click. Skip test stage is the next one. And then it says from code pipelines perspective, there's different software that pushes code or can be given permission to talk with your EC2 instances. And you can see what some of those other options may be. Um, and ooh, let's see. And we are going with AWS Code Deploy. And then it says, well, it already pre-filled out this, so just run with it. Okay, since we've already kind of set up Code Deploy, we have an application we created there called the homepage application. And we're going to be pushing within that application to certain tag instances that are given this name. And then we can just go next. So you can verify that you got the right settings there. Click next. And now we're ready to go create pipeline. And off it goes. And if everything goes well, you see an animation. It goes, all of these things start off as gray, then they go to blue when they're in progress. And if it succeeds, it goes to green. Uh-oh. I got a red message. That's not good. I don't know what I messed up. So I will check and see if I just ruined my whole video or not. All right, just real quick, it says something about insufficient permissions. So I did one of two things wrong. Either when I created my IAM role, it didn't have the right permissions, or when I created that connector on GitHub, I didn't select the right permissions. So let me go check that and I'll tell you what I did. The instructions over here should be right because I do them over and over and over again, but it's so finicky, this whole process, so something can always go wrong. So let me check which place the permissions went wrong. Okay, I'll say something very disconcerting, and that's that I just kind of redid my steps and everything worked this time. So I don't know what the problem was. I went into IAM and I cleaned out some of the stuff that I just like deleted things and re-added them again because I've done this multiple times. So suffice to say, if you do this one time through, you shouldn't have any problems. And anyway, what I was trying to say before, as I'm trying to get back to the steps here, is that what you should see happen is that things go from gray to green, gray to blue to green, and now everything's done. Okay, so in order to see the outcome of what we did, we can click on this little box here that says code deploy. So we're going to basically leave the pipeline portion and go to the code deploy portion. And when we go over to there, we see deployments, deployment. And if we scroll down, we see the EC2 instance that was connected or affected by this recent deployment. And if I click on that, it opened up a new tab. And over here, I see let's see, file, new tab. I see a URL, an IPv4 address, and I click on it. And this is fantastic news because it means I don't have to do the video over again. So the the EC2 instances that we created earlier has now had code pushed to it through our pipeline. So everything's easy from here on out. So we verify that it works. But the exciting thing is not the fact that it works once. The whole purpose of code pipelines is that you make edits to your code and then it subsequently gets pushed out. So I might come back to these scripts in a little bit, just talk about them some more. But for now, let's just do something basic. We'll come over here to code for the HTML page. I click that little edit pencil that was up in the upper right hand corner, and I'm going to make a couple of changes. So the color is going to be changed to 1, 2, 3, uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to change the background color to CCFFCC. Okay, so um, I'm going to start the process here, and then I want to go back to my code. Oh, did I already hit commit? Too fast. All right, let's go back over to here. Let's go over here to code pipeline, pipelines, click on this pipeline, and it's in progress. So um, we see that something was noticed and happened there, and so it's pushing it through. So something is happening. I guess I shouldn't have hit commit so fast on the other page. But we wait whatever it is, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. Eventually these things go and they'll both turn green. So this blue one is in progress right now. And after a few seconds of it churning and doing what it needs to do, this will turn green again. And when it turns green, then what we should see is if I come over to this HTML page that I had before and I hit reload, the change has been picked up. So yes, at the same time that that turned green, it also showed up out there. So this was meant to be a simple example that the idea that you drop in some HTML into your code repository and there's a way to connect it to EC2 instances. And every time you make an update in your repository, it shows up on your EC2 instance and you can see it. So an HTML deployment is really simple. It does get more complicated when you're pushing out full application code, Python, Node, things like that. And just to give you a little idea of what that might be, if I open up my scripts, um, let's just see what we have in here. So one of the things that Code Deploy did on our server was it basically typed at the command line, and the first time it ran, it said install Apache, and then it started Apache, and theoretically it can stop and restart the server every time we do a deployment. It just depends on what hooks we put in here. So this says whenever you install things, install the dependencies and start the server. And anyway, it goes through all of the dependencies each time it does a deployment, including if you define application stop, it will stop the application before it tries to push out new deployments each time. And so there's like at least 7 or more hooks. So depending on how granular you want to get, you can create um, files, bash files that will run. And so this ends up being kind of like low-level technical stuff. But today we just did HTML and we're happy with that. So with that, let's go ahead and well, I give you an option that if you want, you could spice up your HTML page, push it out. So there you go with that. And let's go ahead and delete most of our stuff at this point. And this takes a little while. So I'll go over here. First thing we'll do is to delete the pipeline. We're basically going to delete most things except for IAM stuff because it's kind of a pain to create that stuff. So I'm going to click that and say delete pipeline and say delete. If I can spell the word delete. All right, it's doing that. Now I'm going to go into code deploy And I'm going to go into, let's see, code deploy. And we're looking for, all right, delete the code deploy. Oh, I want to delete the application. It's like, that's why it's not looking right. So I'm going to select this. It doesn't allow me to delete there. So I click on the name of my application and I'm going to say delete application that has a deployment group associated with it. So I'll get a 2-for-1 on this delete. All right, that's going away. I'm going to find my EC2 instance. So there's my EC2 instance, actions, instance state, terminate my instance. Goodbye, EC2 instance. Go to GitHub, find your repo, and under settings, that's where we can go down here and say, delete this repo. Yes, I want to delete this repo. I understand that I'm deleting my repo. Type in all this stuff. Okay, so it's gone now. Now, just a little note about roles and policies. We have an EC2 instance role, a code deploy role, and then like a code pipeline service role that was created as one of the last things that we did. And it actually had a longer name that looks something like this. And under policies, there's going to be something that looks like that. Let's see if I can find it. So this was just created. And so as you go and do this repeatedly, sometimes you need to delete all four of these things if something's breaking, like you saw on my screen. I don't know if it was because I mean, I don't know if it was because I'd done it before and I had to delete some stuff and recreate them, or if it was just a random thing that AWS did. I don't know. That happens sometimes. But the hard part for me anyway is that as you do code deploy pipelines or just do code pipelines over and over again, sometimes this particular thing needs to be reused, the last two items here, and it's a little bit of a, well, actually, it'd be B and D. They need to be reused sometimes, and sometimes it's a little finicky, and you just got to mess around. Like worst case, you can just delete them and recreate them again, like we did here. So, all right. I hope that you have lots of success. We're going to have a more complicated lab next, so get ready for that. And I will hit stop there and stop the recording.